Hi, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to the eighth symposium on water innovation for wet and dry lands between the Great Lakes and the Middle East. This is our eighth year and we're going strong. It's co-organized by the Water Research Center at Northwestern, IIP, the Israel Innovation Project, which is under the Vice President of International Relations at Northwestern, and Current for Innovation, Chicago-based. As I said, the topic of this convention is water innovation for wet and dry lands between Great Lakes and the Middle East. I would like to introduce the Dean of the Engineering School for some opening remarks. Let me introduce him. He was previously POSO. I don't know whether it should be pronounced POSCO, so yeah. I take precaution and I read out the acronym by letter. Professor of Material Sciences and Engineering at MIT, where he served as head of the Department of Material Science and Engineering from 2011 to 2020. Chris's research is focused on structural materials, including metals and ceramics, in which he seeks to control disorder in material misstructures for the purpose of optimizing mechanical properties. So without further ado, let me hand the mic to Dean Schuh.
I'm very excited to see you all here today, and I'm delighted to be able to personally welcome you, and I'm excited for what you have in front of you here this week. So my name is Chris Schuh. I am the Dean of McCormick, and I've been in the role for 9 months. And I have to say that coming to Northwestern, it's really exciting to come to a place where this kind of activity has got such momentum to it. It's a really amazing year for water research, building on many years of success in water research here in the Chicagoland area and at Northwestern. And this is the 8th annual Water Symposium at Northwestern, and what a great topic, and what a timely topic. So the seminar has primarily focused on water in arid regions, particularly in the Middle East, where there's obviously more urgency due to a lack of fresh water, and it sparked a lot of innovation. And how exciting to have a connection here to the Great Lakes region, where we have an abundance of fresh water and are learning how to manage it and how to live with it in an appropriate way. So this year, we're expanding the focus to include innovation and collaboration and technology sharing between the Middle East and the Great Lakes region. And indeed, I mentioned that it's an exciting year for water research, in no small part because the NSF recently announced their Great Lakes Renew Water Innovation Engine project. And that is support of water research to the tune of $160 million a year for a 10-year consortium that is an entire ecosystem, entire regional play. It's led by Current Water Innovation, and we're delighted to be affiliated with that and participating. So thank you for your efforts, Current. So this symposium, in fact, is co-sponsored by Current, and it is a highlighted event of Chicago Water Week. And so this is the very beginning of the festivities, I suppose, for Chicago Water Week. So you are in for a week of fun. So today we are also delighted to be joined by Tera Fong. Tera is the director of EPA Region 5 Water Division. EPA Region 5 is the primary federal entity responsible for safe drinking water and protecting watersheds and aquatic ecosystems in the Great Lakes region. So I know, Tera, we're very excited to hear what you have to say. And I just want to wish you all a very productive and enjoyable and memorable symposium.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for inviting EPA to be a part of this symposium on water innovation for wet and dry lands. A few moments ago, I thought we were going to have the chance to play a really fun game. That is, how many engineers does it take to open a laptop, or I'm sorry, to open a document on my government laptop. But I'm proud to say that we don't need to do that. So EPA Region 5, Regional Administrator Deborah Shore, sends her greetings and appreciation for the work being done here at this symposium by your home institutions and by so many of you. EPA's mission is to protect human health and the environment, and at EPA Region 5, we have nearly 1,000 staff who work every day to ensure that Americans have clean air, land, and water. I'm proud to be a part of that team and to direct EPA Region 5's Water Division. The US EPA is divided into 10 regions. Here in Chicago, we are Region 5, which consists of Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, and 36 tribal nations, including the Prairie Band Potawatomi, which became the first recognized tribal nation in Illinois just a couple of weeks ago. I have to update my bio, it still says 35. Region 5's Water Division ensures drinking water is safe and restores and maintains watersheds and their aquatic ecosystems to protect human health, support economic and recreational activities, and provide healthy habitat for fish, plants, and wildlife. We implement the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Acts, and we do not have responsibility for inspections and enforcement, although that's a sister division within EPA. My division manages programs through 4 core branches. Our groundwater drinking water branch works with states and tribes to implement drinking water programs and requirements. Our permits branch works with states, tribes, and communities on Clean Water Act and underground injection control permits. Our state and tribal programs and support branch provides funding to states, tribes, and communities to implement their environmental programs and invest in infrastructure. And our watersheds and wetlands branch works on dredge and fill permits and other analytical tools to support Clean Water Act programs across states and tribes. My division also supports cross-cutting EPA programs, such as the Urban Waters Program, Healthy Watersheds Protection, and other geographic initiatives. Of course, I'm a bit biased, but I'm pretty sure we're the best division in EPA. Region 5 is also the home to the Great Lakes National Program Office. The Great Lakes National Program Office is tasked with restoring and safeguarding the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the Great Lakes. This office implements the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, along with our federal counterparts in Canada, to protect these international waters. The National Program Office also implements the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, an action plan to clean up legacy contamination throughout the basin's habitats, to address invasive species, and to mitigate the impacts of non-point source pollution. So I always say, when it comes to water and EPA regions, number 5 is number 1. So a bit of an introduction today. Water is essential for life, of course. So in that sense, it's a universal need and poses a universal challenge. We need water to sustain our lives. We need water to support many essential activities, agriculture, navigation, shipping, manufacturing, and so on. When we use water, we need to treat and discharge it in a way that does not otherwise pollute or degrade the environment. And when we have too much water from rainstorms or snowmelt, we need to find a way to manage it to prevent the loss of life, injury, and damage to critical infrastructure and private property. So it's no surprise that water technology for getting water, moving it, and managing it is some of the very oldest that we have as human beings and the most widely used technologies in the world. And while it's hard to say that the importance of water will ever grow or diminish, essential is essential, there are many reasons to think that we are entering an era in which our collective and individual need for water will play an increasing role and impact our society, and that water technology will play an increasingly prominent role in meeting the needs and challenges that we face. So I'd like to start a bit today with talking through some of EPA's priorities in the water space. So EPA's priorities in protecting drinking water, as well as protecting aquifers, ponds, rivers, watersheds, and lakes. And I will talk about the challenges we face throughout the country and how they impact us here in the Midwest. Finally, I'll discuss the roles of regulation and innovation to address these challenges. Ensuring clean and safe water for all communities is one of the central EPA goals that we set for ourselves in our most recent strategic plan. 2022 was the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. Enormous progress has been made since its passage, along with passage of other environmental statutes. The condition of urban waters and waterways has improved tremendously in the last 50 years. And if you haven't had a chance to walk along the Chicago River, or the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, or any major urban waterway for that matter, I would encourage you to do so. 50 years ago, perhaps I wouldn't have made the same recommendation. But just recently, we heard that an open swim is being planned for the Chicago River. And the fact that folks can and want to swim in the Chicago River is one just tangible sign of the tremendous progress we've made in the last 50 years. Still, we continue to face significant challenges, including water equity and affordability, aging infrastructure, legacy lead pipes, nutrient pollution, contamination from PFAS, cybersecurity threats, and the climate crisis. And EPA is committed to prioritizing equity, environmental justice, and the lived experiences of those most impacted by water pollution as we do our work in the policy and regulatory space. These are EPA's priorities, and while not all of them may immediately strike you as having a technology component, we do think that they can. We think, for example, that aging infrastructure, some may think, for example, that aging infrastructure is not a matter of technology, but is a matter of funding and political will. But we will see the challenges are often complex and intertwined, and even if technology cannot provide an immediate solution to these challenges, it can be crucial in expanding the range of options available to address them. So as the title of our symposium suggests, even though the need for water is universal, the specific water challenges that we must grapple with can vary very differently on a community by community basis and around the country. I'm going to chart some of the key challenges to the safety and integrity of fresh water and drinking water here in Region 5 and across the country. Collectively, we will see that these challenges show us how interconnected we are and that the watersheds that sustain us are interconnected, as are the threats that face them. The first I'll highlight on, and a key to this forum's focus, is the dry part, drought. One of the defining characteristics of Region 5 states is that each of them touch one, if not more than one, of the Great Lakes. The environmental wonder here supplies drinking water for 40 million people, provides more than 1.3 million jobs, and sustains life for thousands of species. In addition, we have within Region 5, Minnesota, nicknamed the land of 10,000 lakes. And while that may seem like hyperbole, they will tell you it's an understatement, and they will remind you of that whenever they get the chance. Also within Region 5, we have 3 of our 6 states touching the Mississippi River and the Ohio River, which itself provides drinking water for 5 million people. We also have the Little and Great Miami buried aquifers that comprise one of the country's largest groundwater aquifers. So by comparison to some of our sister regions out west, Region 5 is blessed with access to abundant and fresh water. We may be tempted to think that the challenges that they face in water scarcity don't exist here, but that's not true. Just 30 miles from Chicago and 30 miles from Lake Michigan is the city of Joliet, which has relied for most of its history on groundwater pumped from a sandstone aquifer. With a population of 150,000, Joliet is the 3rd largest city in Illinois. But in 2015, a report from the Illinois State Water Survey concluded that due to depletion of the aquifer, Joliet's source of drinking water will be depleted within years, perhaps as soon as 2030. So the challenges faced by the city of Joliet and other Midwestern cities demonstrate that water scarcity is a challenge not limited to the places we typically think of as water scarce. In some parts of the country, increased demand for water, whether for agriculture or to supply growing cities and new manufacturing facilities, has led to pumping groundwater faster than we can replenish it. So technology for managing water wisely, improving the efficacy of water use, monitoring water use, and detecting leaks and other inefficiencies in water distribution systems will remain important and indeed over time likely grow in prominence no matter where you are. We need to keep in mind that we live in a highly interconnected world. In many cases, water drives this interconnection. What happens in one place can affect what happens in other places, and water can be both the medium that allows this to happen and can itself be affected by it. For example, let's consider the example of nutrients in the Gulf of Mexico. Here in Chicago, we are about 900 miles from the Gulf. Some parts of EPA Region 5 are 1,500 miles away from the Gulf. However, because our region includes the Mississippi and Ohio River watersheds, and we're the agricultural heartland of the country, we have a large number of farms and other agricultural operations that can contribute nutrient pollution to these waters and create the Gulf zone in the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. When water with excess nitrogen and phosphorus from point and non-point sources reaches these waterways it can make its way into the river system and eventually to the Gulf of Mexico, where it contributes to harmful algal blooms along the Gulf Coast and a dead zone estimated to be 6,500 square miles in size. Closer to home, the Western Lake Erie Basin is beset by similar nutrient challenges. Lake Erie has been a state and federal priority for decades, but it gained national attention in 2014 when a harmful algal bloom outside of Toledo, Ohio, required the city to issue a do not drink order for its 400,000 customers. Nutrient reduction to Great Lake Erie is a huge focus of our work in Region 5 and under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. Needless to say, nutrient challenges not just affect these big water bodies, but the local rivers, ponds, lakes, and streams closer to home as well. And we live in an interconnected world where water challenges in these local waters can impact the bigger ones as well. I'd like to turn next to infrastructure. Many communities across the country have aging water infrastructure, both for treating and distributing water and collecting and distributing wastewater and stormwater. Many of the cities in the Midwest are grappling with the need to replace their aging infrastructure while also doing so in the context of a decreased population, smaller industrial and commercial bases, and city budgets that are no longer growing. And that connects the challenge of aging infrastructure to the challenge of affordability. Because if your city or village cannot afford and does not have the financial resources to invest in replacing its water infrastructure, it may need to raise rates and take on increased public debt burden, or decide that it has no choice but to defer the necessary maintenance and increase the likelihood of costly failure. Here we see that the intersection of the need to update aging infrastructure intersects with the challenge of affordability. And because increased water rates and taxes will more likely be a burden to communities that are less affluent, aging infrastructure intersects with the challenge of equity as well. So the challenge of aging infrastructure is not simply a matter of costs associated with replacing it. For example, consider the risk posed by lead plumbing and lead service lines. In April 2014, the city of Flint, Michigan switched its water source from finished drinking water from the Great Lakes Water Authority in Detroit to treating raw water from the Flint River. The inadequacy of water treatment, along with the new corrosive source, led to the stripping of the protective orthophosphate layer from the pipes throughout the water system, causing lead levels to rise rapidly and exposing approximately 100,000 residents to elevated lead levels. In the aftermath of the Flint water crisis, the potential risk posed by lead plumbing and lead service lines have become much more widely recognized, and replacing them has become a national priority, and a particular priority for the Biden-Harris administration. Midwestern cities like Chicago and Cleveland have some of the largest numbers of lead service lines in the country. Chicago has an estimated 400,000 lead service lines, the highest number of any city in the country. And 6 of the 10 cities in the US with the largest number of lead service lines are here within Region 5. And so while EPA has regulated lead in drinking water since 1991, we are now grappling with new challenges of emerging contaminants, those that we know may cause environmental or public health impacts, but in some cases have not yet been regulated. PFAS is one example. Exposure to PFAS has been linked to deadly cancers, impacts to liver and the heart, and immune and developmental challenges to infants and children. Because the Midwest is the industrial heartland of the US, we have a lot of industry and a disproportionately high number of former industrial sites where PFAS is present. The priority EPA and the Biden-Harris administration have placed on PFAS is driving states and local governments to look for new approaches and technology to address PFAS in drinking water, remove it from wastewater, and clean it up from sites that have been contaminated. Addressing these freshwater concerns is a key priority for EPA and the administration. And we can measure the importance that we place on these priorities by the amount of resources being devoted to them. The bipartisan infrastructure law passed in November 2021 includes $50 billion, and that's billion with a B, which represents the largest single investment to drinking water, wastewater, water reuse, conveyance, and water storage infrastructure in American history. This legislation includes $15 billion in funding to replace lead service lines and $10 billion to address PFAS and other emerging contaminants, along with $23 billion for other investments to upgrade the nation's water and wastewater. These investments represent something special, a truly once-in-a-generation opportunity to renew, restore, and revitalize the nation's water infrastructure. Last year, EPA Region 5 in my division awarded $2 billion to our states and tribes for water and wastewater investment. And I really look forward to continuing to implement these investments and continue the work under the bipartisan infrastructure law. It's nice to give out money. Along with these financial investments, I'd like to talk a bit about some of our regulatory priorities and work in this space. When Congress writes environmental laws, EPA implements them by writing regulations. Often we set the national standards that are then implemented by states and tribes, and they enforce them through their own regulations. Cities, villages, and local utilities must meet the standards set by these regulations. However, we know meeting new standards is not frictionless or costless. If a community fails to implement the national standards, we can help, and we can also enforce our regulations and help companies and utilities understand the requirements. Just last month, I'm proud to say EPA finalized the first ever national drinking water standard to protect communities from exposure to PFAS. This regulation will reduce PFAS exposure for approximately 100 million people, preventing thousands of deaths, reducing tens of thousands of serious illnesses. EPA estimates that between 6 and 10% of the 66,000 public water systems that will be subject to this rule may need to take actions to reduce PFAS to meet these new limits. The new limits in this rule will be achievable using a range of available technologies and approaches, such as granulated activated carbon, reverse osmosis, and ion exchange systems. Drinking water systems will have the flexibility to determine which is the best solution for their community. Additionally, last November, EPA announced proposed improvements to the lead and copper rule to reduce lead in drinking water that can irreparably harm children and adults. The proposed improvements to the lead and copper rule will strengthen public health protections, reduce complexity, and streamline the implementation of these rules. Major provisions of that proposal included achieving 100% of lead service line removal within 10 years, locating legacy lead pipes, requiring water systems to provide an inventory of those by this fall and regularly update those inventories, important changes to the sampling provisions of the rule, and lower lead action level from 15 micrograms per liter to 10. Finally, water systems under this proposal with multiple lead action level exceedances will be required to conduct additional outreach to customers and make certified filters to remove lead available to their customers. We look forward to finalizing this regulation and to implementing this rule within Region 5. I'd also like to talk a bit about research and the work that EPA does in that space, because in addition to tackling these challenges through regulation, we also invest in research. EPA's Office of Research and Development is leading the charge in developing technology to address drinking water, water treatment, stormwater, and wastewater matters. We have at least 35 active patents, and our innovation roster includes a lead exposure assessment device, a simultaneous sample device for mobile water analysis, a mobile water treatment system, a system to generate early warnings of cyanotoxin production, and a biological filter for oxidizing ammonia in drinking water treatment. These are the kinds of tools we need to ensure safe water and for all communities amid the confluence of aging infrastructure and the challenges of climate change. The Office of Research and Development also awards research grants to partner institutions to help tackle these challenges. For example, the Office of Research and Development has awarded more than $6 million to 7 institutions to develop technologies to control nutrient loadings and address harmful algal blooms. Through these research grants, the Water Research Foundation is developing advanced nitrogen removal processes for wastewater. The University of Idaho is developing water treatment technology for phosphorus removal. Researchers at San Jose State University are modeling farm runoff treatment systems. And at the University of South Florida, grantees are building a holistic assessment framework for scaling up nutrient management technologies. The innovation sustained by these grants can go a long way to preventing algae blooms and the dangerous water quality and drinking water concerns that come along with them. The Office of Research and Development is also supporting research to accelerate innovative alternate water treatment for small communities, including those that operate lagoon systems. For example, Michigan Tech is testing a floating treatment wetland system, and West Virginia University is developing a tool to help communities select optimal and cost-effective technology options to improve nutrient removal in treated wastewater. Contamination from wastewater in smaller rural communities can pose threats to drinking water, particularly where private wells are the main source of this water. This research will help support reliable and affordable technology to ensure safe water to communities of all sizes. And here within Region 5, we have large cities like Chicago and a number of very small and rural areas as well. With a continued focus on water treatment, this year EPA will award research grants focused on removing micropollutants from water, as well as drinking water quality when water is used. This funding opportunity will be available soon, so I would encourage folks to take a look at EPA's research grant page on our website. So here at Region 5, innovation and technology are also central to our work in restoring and protecting the Great Lakes. The use of innovative approaches and state-of-the-art technology has helped us achieve unprecedented progress over the last 15 years under the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. We're using novel technologies and remediation techniques to clean up contaminated sediments. For example, we used activated carbon pellets to prevent dioxins and furans from entering the food chain at a large 350-acre reservoir in Duluth, Minnesota. This was a technology that we piloted at the smaller scale before moving it to that one. Our federal and state partners are also testing new emerging technologies that hold great promise to assess, block, or manage invasive species from getting into the Great Lakes, such as environmental DNA and broadening the scope of non-native species surveillance. As I've mentioned, excess nutrients continues to be a source of harmful algal blooms in the Great Lakes, and it is a very challenging problem that requires innovative solutions. In the next 5 years, our federal and state partners in Great Lakes restoration will test or pilot new and innovative ways to achieve nutrient reductions, such as slow-release fertilizer and manure management technologies. Under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, the U.S. has committed to reduce phosphorus loads to Lake Erie by 40% by 2025. And here we are committed to using the latest science to ensure that the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative projects are also resilient to climate change. I will use that as a segue to talk about climate change. On that note, I'd like to spend a bit more time talking about climate change, which is a priority for the Biden-Harris administration, for our administrator at EPA, and for our regional administrator, Deborah Shore. Deborah often says that the climate change is not simply a challenge of our time, it is the challenge of all time. We have seen climate change undergo an important transition in the public consciousness, from being something that might or may happen at some point in the distant future to something that we are witnessing in real time. When we turn on the TV, read newspapers, or see our social media pages, we are frequently confronted by stories about extreme weather events, and scientists are increasingly comfortable attributing the frequency and intensity of these events to long-term, large-scale changes due to climate change. Let's start by talking about some of the physical effects of climate change. Climate change is happening. Perhaps it's more accurate to say climate change has happened and climate change is continuing to happen. According to the 5th National Climate Assessment, global average temperatures from 2012 to 2021 were more than 1 degree Celsius warmer than during the pre-industrial period before 1900. Without significant changes in greenhouse gas emissions, we would expect that to continue increasing. To understand the impact of climate change, EPA quantifies an increase in 1 degree Celsius as a new level of climate-related severity. In other words, we have estimates of potential climate change impacts when global average temperatures rise by 1, 2, 3, and 4 degrees Celsius. Under scenarios where greenhouse gas emissions remain high, the impacts occur faster. Under scenarios where the greenhouse gas emissions are lower, we expect the impacts to arrive more slowly. So our starting point is that global average temperature has already increased and will continue to increase in coming decades. And although it's difficult to predict the exact nature of the impacts of climate change and what will happen where, it has become clear that climate patterns that we had become accustomed to are no longer a reliable guide for what we can expect in the future. We have already seen changes in the planet's oceans and glaciers. The oceans are warming and becoming more acidic. Ice caps are melting and sea levels are rising. Warmer temperatures increase frequency, the intensity, and duration of heat waves, which are occurring at 3 times more often than they did in the 60s, approximately 6 times per year instead of 3. And since the 70s, we've been seeing an increase in the number of unusually hot summer days and nights. Here within the Great Lakes, we are experiencing much warmer winters, as folks may have recalled from a few months ago. Our colleagues at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration reported this year a new near-record low for basin-wide ice coverage. At the beginning of February, ice coverage across the Great Lakes was just 7%, whereas the average for the height of winter is 40%. Over the long term, NOAA records show that all 5 lakes have seen a collective 25% decrease in ice cover and fewer days of ice duration from 1973 to today. We are seeing changes in the frequency, intensity, and duration of extreme one-day weather events. And in fact, nationwide, 9 of the top 10 years for extreme one-day precipitation events have occurred since 1996. We are seeing other changes in precipitation patterns in some areas, particularly in the Southwest, have experienced less precipitation than expected based on historical patterns. In short, we can expect an increase in heat waves and the number of days above 90 degrees, more extreme weather events, including storms, droughts, and floods. And while the particular effects may differ depending on where you live, what you do for a living, and whether you're in a community that is already socially vulnerable, we know that they will occur. Here in the Midwest, we have seen intense rainstorms that dump unusual amounts of water, sometimes in a very short period of time. Here in Chicago and across the Midwest, it has become common to hear folks say, we've had 3 100-year storms this summer. I'd like to mention 3 climate change impacts specific to water resources. One, in many areas of the country, climate change is likely to increase folks' demand for water while shrinking supplies. Warmer temperatures and changes in precipitation patterns have been reducing snowpack in the West and mountainous regions. Persistent droughts in some parts of the US have accelerated the decline of aquifers as a source of groundwater. Second, we can expect impacts on water quality. As we've seen, increases in nutrient runoff along with warming temperatures can enhance and increase harmful algal blooms, as we've described in the Gulf of Mexico and Lake Erie. Increased rainfall and more intense rainfall can lead to more runoff of nutrients, sediments, and pathogens into water bodies, and therefore harming water quality and making it more expensive to treat for drinking water. Third and finally, climate change is also increasing stress and demands on water infrastructure. We have already mentioned that one of the impacts of climate change is an increase in the number of extreme weather events. These can easily overwhelm the capacity of municipal storm systems, storm sewers, and other infrastructure. And in many cases were built on assumptions that are no longer relevant and increasingly out of date. In addition, climate impacts on other parts of society may have indirect effects on water utilities. For example, storms that damage power generation or distribution might shut down water and wastewater plants. In that sense, climate change is a contributor to the increased demands and expectations that we face as we continually work to seek and update and maintain and address the aging water infrastructure in this country. Commiserate with the global and generational importance of climate change, the Biden-Harris administration and EPA have devoted significant resources under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act, including $27 billion, and again, that's billion with a B, for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, a program to mobilize financing and leverage private capital for clean energy and climate projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other air pollutants. And that $27 billion is separate and on top of the multi-billion dollars investment we discussed for water and wastewater infrastructure. So together, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act provide more than $100 billion in funding to deliver a wide range of environmental programs, advance environmental justice, and combat climate change. Much of this funding is not directly related to water technology or infrastructure, but it can still have large and indirect impacts on water. So the title of my discussion today is The Water Technology That We Need, and I hope that my discussion has clarified as what EPA views as the most pressing challenges facing our mission of ensuring clean and safe water for all communities. It has spotlighted the meaningful investment that we're making in science as well as infrastructure to address these technologies. But we will need diverse kinds of water technology to meet our increasingly complex challenges. As the example of Joliet, Illinois demonstrates, we will need to continue to address technology for managing water wisely, improving the efficacy of use, distribution, and treatment, and detecting leaks. As examples in Western Lake Erie and the Gulf of Mexico show, we need technology for reducing nutrients from water. And as our regulatory examples show, we need technology for removing PFAS from drinking water and wastewater. And we need technology for identifying lead service lines because we can't remove them all if we don't know where they are. But as the folks in this room know, it is probably not fair or reasonable to expect that new technology can overcome all of the challenges we face on its own. In many cases, there may not be a feasible technology solution available today. In other cases, the technology may exist, but it may be too costly or difficult to implement at the scale necessary to be effective. It may take too much time to take a good idea from theory to practice to wide-scale adoption. And in many cases, the technology may be available, practical, and even relatively affordable, but decision makers still need to be convinced to accept some amount of risk or additional expense to take it on. It is also important to note that many of the challenges we face are themselves the product of technology advancements. That is to say, as we consider technological approaches for how to protect human health and the environment from industrial pollution, we remain aware that industrial pollution is itself a product of technology. So in a real sense, some of the water technology we need the most is technology to prevent water challenges from getting worse. Here are some examples of the gaps that we're seeing and what will need innovation to help address. Can we identify new processes and practices to allow stormwater management infrastructure designed in the mid-20th century to meet the new demands placed upon it today by climate change? Can we find a way to peel back the concrete skin that covers our industrial landscape and urbanized areas and allow rainwater and snowmelt to infiltrate into the landscape rather than being treated and requiring energy to manage it? Can we identify newer, better, and more affordable ways to recycle water so that cities and regions can be more resilient to the impacts of climate change? And as water utilities increasingly make the use of information technology to manage and optimize their systems, can we find ways to maintain and improve cybersecurity in global challenges, in a global environment where threats there are increasing and multiplying? So in conclusion, there's a lot more to be said about technology. And I know this symposium will give us all ample opportunities to ask key questions and seek key answers. I hope you're looking forward to the discussion, and I expect that it will be an interesting and productive one. But I'd like to turn back to one of the things I highlighted at the beginning on EPA's mission to protect human health and the environment, and doing so in a way where we're committed to prioritizing equity, environmental justice, and the lived experiences of those most directly impacted by water pollution. This commitment that means that EPA puts people at the center of everything we do, and that we need to consider the folks most impacted by the work every day and the concrete needs of human communities. Excuse me. Equity and justice cannot be solved through purely technological means. True social justice requires a more comprehensive set of what goals of water policy and technology are, and an intellectual commitment that goes beyond straightforward scientific and technological development. So I would like to conclude by saying that the water technology we need should not be defined merely by the next logical step in the development of an existing technology. It should not be defined simply by meeting the minimal requirements of the Clean Water Act or Safe Drinking Water Acts. Our ideas about the water technology we need should be ambitious and should be driven by the broad environmental and human health needs of communities. Should be driven by thinking about how we can best protect human health and the environment, and how we can continue to promote equity and justice along the way. As technology advances, it shouldn't be deployed just to a select few. It should be available to all, including those communities which may have lacked access to it in the past. And so while the symposium includes an ambitious technical agenda, I would encourage our discussion to be guided by these broader goals as well. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today and for inviting EPA. My best wishes to you all for the rest of the symposium, and have a fantastic Chicago Water Week.
For a comprehensive, illuminating survey of EPA. I think that for some of us, maybe not most of us, this is new. We haven't been exposed to this in our past conferences, and it really opens a new avenue of collaboration, hopefully.